Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is a prolific writer and investigator, Craig Unger, the author of some of the books, as you can see, The House of Trump, House of Putin, The American Compromise, and most recently, Den of Spies. We'll be touching on some of the key themes that run through these books in our program today. But before we get started, could you please tell us about how you got involved into investigating these political controversies and what made you attracted to these specific topics?
Well, going way back when I started out in journalism, I think it was sort of the heyday of investigative journalism more than 50 years ago. So there were stories like Watergate, the Pentagon Papers, and the My Lai massacre that had enormous impact and could really change things in a way that I don't think happens today. But starting in more recently, I've done 6 books on the Republican Party's assault on democracy. And it started out, I didn't start wanting to do a 6-book series. They just sort of fell into place. But I started out after the events of September 11th, 2001. I was in New York. I actually lived near the World Trade Center. And I went back and traced the events leading up to it. And I've been doing that kind of thing ever since, really, most recently with 2 books on Trump's relationship with the Russians and the Trump-Russia. Well, I don't think it's a hoax. I think I document that quite well in my books.
Uh, Indeed, there's been a lot of questions about Trump's relationship with Russia, with the Russians, with Russian oligarchs, with Russian organized crime. But I want to actually jump right into that and ask you, what is the most compelling piece of evidence that suggests Trump was cultivated, not merely courted, by Russian intelligence over the decades?
Well, I mean, there's so much, it's hard to pick out one. And I'm doing a Trump-Russia timeline on my Substack, if you look at Craig Unger. So I've already done 23 posts. But one of the most significant ones, I think, was Trump made his first trip to Russia in 1987. And I believe they had started cultivating him before then, as early as 1980. Um, but when he returned in 87, people forget this, he started running for president in the 1988 presidential election. This was during the second Reagan administration was just coming to an end, and George H.W. Bush Sr. was clearly the favorite to be the Republican nominee. But Trump started to run, and he actually made a campaign appearance in New Hampshire. And then he took out, this was the extraordinary thing, he took out full-page ads in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Boston Globe. And he printed his foreign policy. And you know what? It was basically verbatim KGB talking points for that era. He was assaulting NATO. He said the United States should break up its alliance with Japan. And he was essentially doing the KGB's work for them.
So there's nothing new about Trump's attacks on NATO, and we're talking about, a period of time where the Soviet Union was already at its weaker point. We're talking about it way before Trump started complaining that NATO is not pulling its weight financially. It seems to be interesting that Trump's talking points from decades past are now being recycled without anyone looking at his record and asking how is it that he's been repeating the same story for decades without accounting for changing circumstances or for anything else. That certainly raises a lot of questions. Um, but here's my question. You mentioned that some of the early links could have been as early as 1980. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Right. As far as I can tell, the whole thing started out in 1980. Actually, one can go back to 1977 when he
Mm-hmm.
married Ivanka, and Ivanka happened to come from the village in Czechoslovakia where the Czech Secret Service, the STB, was located, and they started clearly paying attention to her father and but through him to Trump. But in 1980, Trump was building what became his first and one of the very few truly successful real estate developments. He was developing what is now the Hyatt Grand Central Hotel, right next to Grand Central Station. And like any hotel, it needed television sets, loads of television sets for hundreds of rooms. And you might think that a Hyatt hotel would go to a vendor like Sony or Samsung or a major electronics firm to purchase TVs in bulk. But instead, Trump bought them from a place called Joy Ludd Electronics. And it was essentially a KGB front. It was run and co-owned by a man named Semyon Kislin, who is still around today, and he came from the former Soviet Union. And according to one of my sources, I spent a lot of time interviewing a major from the KGB, a former major named Yuri Shvits, and Shvits told me that Kislin was essentially a spotter agent, and by that he means someone who looks for assets or intelligence agents to be recruited for the KGB. And he approached Trump and made the sale. And that seems to have been the opening gambit by a member of the KGB.
What interest would they have had with Trump, or did they turn him into somebody seeking political interests? I mean, there were many essentially real estate and other wealthy business people around at the time. So was it just an issue of coincidence that Trump happened to be married to a Czechoslovakian national and made it and just naturally gave an opening, or was there something else that would have sparked their interest?
Right. At the time, the Russians had a lot of assets. Like I'm thinking of, forgive me, that uh, Armand Hammer, who was a major oil executive, and they wanted the KGB wanted people who were big figures in the financial world, and at that time, Armand Hammer must have been in his 80s, and he was sort of aging out. And I believe they were looking for someone to replace him. This was not a case of having this long-term 40-a-year range plan where they said, I know we're going to make this guy into an agent and become president of the United States. It
Mm-hmm.
was not like that. It was more that this was 1985 was known as the year of the spy. And the Russians were reaching out to hundreds of people, particularly in the financial world. And Trump was one of them. And I should carefully distinguish between an agent and an asset. And I don't believe Trump was an intelligence agent for the KGB. An agent is someone who's employed by an intelligence agency who gets a paycheck. He or she would know that
Mm-hmm.
they are employed and they could be tasked with very specific operations. That was not what was happening with Donald Trump. He was more of an asset. And by that, I mean, uh, they'd do favors for him, and in return, he'd do something for them. And it starts out with him getting a good deal for hundreds of TV sets for the Hyatt Grand Central. Later, the Natalia Dubinina and her father, Yuri Dubinin, who was ambassador first to the UN and then to the United States from the Soviet Union, they met with Trump, and that led to an invitation to go to Moscow, and it was a trip orchestrated by the KGB.
What was the agenda of the trip, and why haven't the U.S. intelligence services, or anybody's intelligence services for that matter, gather any information about what went on at that time, at least consequently, if not contemporaneously?
Again, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat the last part, please?
What was the objective of the trip, and why haven't Western intelligence services picked up on it?
Right. I think that the objective of the trip appears to have been to cultivate Trump as an asset. And it was immediately after this trip when he returned. The trip took place. He was in Moscow on the 4th of July. I mean, that's something the KGB liked to do it on the United States Independence Day when they were
Hmm.
cultivating people. And not long after Trump returned, it was in September of that year, that's when he started to run for president. And that's when he took out the full page ad I mentioned previously, in which he seems to be touting KGB talking points.
Was Trump aware that he was being cultivated?
That's not entirely clear, and I don't like to pretend I can get inside the mind of Donald Trump. It's I'm not sure that I would be very comfortable there, but he may well, people use the term useful idiot. It's possible that's what Trump was, but as you'll see if we go along, he had to figure out at some point, boy, people were the Russians came to him. He started laundering money for them, and they were buying, hundreds of millions of dollars came to him through the Russians, really more than $1 billion.
So would it be, just for the sake of clarity, the fact that Trump may not have known or was an possibly unknowing asset, does that distinction matter in terms of US national security?
It would be good. It would certainly be good to know, but I do think, regardless, Trump is a grave risk to national security. I mean, think about it. The president of the United States is an asset for Russian intelligence. That is the greatest national security failure in American history. It is just extraordinary that happened. And what I find very discouraging is I've written two books about that. Both were New York Times bestsellers, but America does not seem to have realized this. I mean, he was, as you know, just reelected in November, and it seems like somehow or other this message, which I think is a hugely significant point in history, the election of a Russian asset to be president of the United States. I think that message has to get across to America.
Getting back to this idea of compromise that's tied intimately to Trump's assorted rumored and real adventures, how much of the so-called compromise narrative depends on conventional intelligence tradecraft versus modern hybrid influence, essentially basically propaganda and political lobbying and things of that nature?
Well, I think it's certain that they have some compromise on Donald Trump, but exactly what it is unclear. And I mean, one thing that is very clear, for example, is in 1984, Trump began laundering money for the Russian mafia. And it's important to understand that the Russian mafia is very different than the American mafia, which has always been at war with the FBI. Instead, the Russian mafia really is almost an enforcement arm of what was the KGB and is now the FSB.
Hmm.
Um, and in 1984, a guy named David Bogatin went to Trump Tower. I believe Trump actually initiated this transaction. And
Hmm.
Bogatin put down $6 million in cash and said, I'll take 5 condos. And in America, our regulations concerning real estate are very lax. So it's possible, in fact, it's quite easy to buy property through an anonymous vehicle
Mm.
with disguising or not revealing who the owner of the property will be. And it's also possible to do it in all cash transactions. Those are the two predicates for money laundering. And that first happened, so far as I can tell, in 1984 with Trump, and it went on again and again and again until it's clear that I think at least something like 1,300 condos, Trump branded condos, were sold under those circumstances.
And how do we know that the buyers were connected to the Soviet Union as opposed to any other country, or be just American, you know, business people or criminals or whoever?
Well, I don't have a full and complete breakdown, but it's clear that hundreds and hundreds of the units were bought by people who tied to the former Soviet Union.
Hmm.
And that's true. I mean, in Sunny Isles, Florida, which is a Trump branded development, there are so many that the restaurant in the lobby, the menus are all in Russian.
Hmm. So, you know that in the 90s and 2000s, a lot of the Russian celebrities and those sorts of people and oligarchs as well started buying condos in Florida and also in New York and other places, and certainly started going to Florida for vacations and to protect their assets, but financial assets. But is there any indication that this was ongoing in the 1980s? After all, the US was very hard to get to for Soviets.
Um, Yes, but well, I mean, what I found is I found at least 13 people living in Trump Tower, for example, were tied with either with the Russian mafia, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a complete breakdown on everyone who bought condos and the extent to it, but I do know there were certainly specifics. There was a huge poker ring that was busted in I forget if it was 2008. I don't remember the exact year, but Vadim Trincher was a internationally known poker player and a Soviet emigre, and he had a huge ongoing poker game that was used to launder money, among other things, and he was indicted, and I believe 34 people in that gambling ring were indicted by the FBI.
How is it that for all Trump's connections to extremely unsavory people, was he never thoroughly investigated, including when he started running for office, especially when he started becoming a more serious political figure, circa 2015-16? I mean, I could understand that people didn't really take him seriously in the 80s or 90s, but later on, clearly he became a well-known national figure. Why wasn't there a background check that was a serious one? I'm not talking about the Steele dossier and other, ham-handed operations. I'm talking about a serious, thorough background research by the FBI and other agencies.
Right. Well, that's a wonderful question. As I said, that I think this is the most serious counterintelligence failure in American history, and part of the blame has to be on the FBI. I mentioned a few minutes ago a man named David Bogatin who was with the Russian
Hmm.
mafia and laundering money. He was associated with Semyon Mogilevich, who was a billionaire. Wizard at money laundering and one of the top figures in the Russian mafia. And when I look at the FBI failures, it was fascinating to me that when William Sessions, who had been director of the FBI, when he retired as director and became a private lawyer, one of his first clients was Semyon Mogilevich. So suddenly, the head of the FBI went from investigating these people to making loads and loads of money by being their lawyers. That happened yet again with a subsequent director of the FBI, Louis B. Free. When he retired from the FBI. He then represented Prevezon, which you may know from the Magnitsky scandal and all that. So suddenly they were switching rooms, switching sides. And I think this must have hurt the FBI's investigation. But in any case, it was a huge, huge failure on the part of the FBI.
So that leads me to the to my next point, which is, do you believe the collapse of the Soviet Union obscured rather than ended the influence of Russian intelligence in the West?
Right. No, I think it was a powerful force in allowing this to happen. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, the general view in the American intelligence community was that we won, the Cold
Hmm.
War is over, let's celebrate. And in fact, a lot of other stuff was going on that no one was really paying attention to. And one thing was when the Soviet Union collapsed, you started to see the rise of Russia as a mafia state. This is before Putin, of course, but you ended up having, by the time Putin became president, I think it was in 1999, you had loads of oligarchs who were taking over one industry after another. There would be Deripaska in the aluminum
Hmm.
industry and so forth. And a lot of what was going on meant there was enormous amounts of flight capital. You had a sudden new wave of new billionaires. And if you're a multi-billionaire, and you live in, I don't know, I really don't know Russia. I've never been there. But if you live in Minsk, I suspect you might want to get out of the country every once in a while, and you
Hmm.
want to have money in the West, especially to protect the money. So that meant there were literally hundreds of billions of dollars in flight capital leaving the former Soviet Union. And that money had to be laundered. And what's the best way to launder money? It is through real estate. So it would be great to have a friendly real estate magnate who has thousands of apartments to sell at more than $1 million each and he doesn't look too hard at who's buying them, and he allows the Russians to do that. And that's really what happened.
Hmm.
At the same time, I really should add that, Trump was not doing well as a businessman. He's always thought of as a brilliant businessman, but in fact, he was lousy. And when he went into the gambling business in Atlantic City, he way overexpanded and was losing a fortune, and he was over $1 billion in debt. So what the Russians were doing really bailed him out and saved him.
How do you respond to critics who claim that the Russia-Trump connection is an exaggerated Cold War fantasy repurposed for a new political era?
That's easy. Read my books. I mean, I've written two of them. No one has questioned a single fact in my books. Each one has about 1,000 source notes. They're in the books, and you can see bit by bit, step by step. I'm also doing this on my Substack. I'm up to 23 separate steps of how he was sort of lured into uh, uh, becoming an asset for the KGB and step by step how they won him over.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Besides the condo issue, the links between the condos and the ex-Soviet expats, are there any other patterns or things in the timeline in Trump's business dealings that suggest long-term grooming or manipulation by Russian actors?
Um, other than money laundering, I mean, well, one is the money laundering took various forms, and for
Hmm.
example, I think it was in 2002, there was a firm called Bayrock that opened in Trump Tower. And I don't know if you remember Felix Sater, who was the
Mm.
managing director of that firm, but there were also other people with it who were part of the Eurasian group. They were emigres from the Soviet Union, enormously wealthy. And they started doing buildings that were branded by Trump. They were called Trump Towers. There was one in New York in Soho, the Soho Trump Tower. There was one in Toronto, in Panama, and so forth. A lot of these projects failed. Trump put $0 into it. He didn't really develop them, but he was franchising and using his name, and that was a variation on the original money laundering scheme.
So if those projects were never really developed, what were these people getting out of this arrangement?
Well, no, some of them were developed. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
Trump Soho was built, it went bankrupt right away, and is now, I think it's called the Dominic. I think similar things happened, and a lot of these are all tied up in court. The Bayrock, Felix
Mm-hmm.
Sater, managing director. I mean, they seem to develop these schemes that just aren't going to work as a real estate deal, but they paid themselves fairly handsomely.
So essentially, they didn't care that the projects failed. They just wanted to make a quick buck on all of that.
And yeah, I think that's really what was going on.
It's the American reluctance to confront the full scope of Russian influence more about fear of destabilizing democratic myths than lack of evidence.
The American failure to confront it, is that what you're?
Yeah. Is it because the Americans are basically afraid of everything that they will uncover and that it could collapse entire industry? Or is it really, as they claim, about lack of evidence? Can they actually prove any of that? Or is it more that they just are afraid of the uncertainty that would follow, lack of confidence by investors and so forth? If they unravel the level of Russian involvement in US businesses and industries and politics and so forth.
Right. I think it's more the fear of getting to the bottom of it in a way, though I think, what I've seen is and having done 6 books like these, that again and again, we have a system of checks and balances and sort of guardrails where and again that's been falling apart. And the Republicans have essentially declared war on it. I mean, one of the first things Trump did when he got in with this administration is he fired, I think it was 17 inspectors general overseeing various agencies. Those are the guys who are supposed to make sure things are going right. And they're supposed to correct them if people are cheating or stealing or just doing things in wrong procedures. And Trump wanted to get rid of that so he could run things exactly the way he wanted. Um, I think also the whole notion of hybrid warfare, one of the things that's going on with Russia versus the United States, I think it is a war, but it's not a conventional war with bombs, bullets, and boots on the ground. It's a war. There was a General Gerasimov who had what was known as the Gerasimov Doctrine, in which he said, look, our military really isn't up to stuff, but there are a lot of other ways to wage war. And one is through disinformation. And you see that in our social media. I mean, what I had been on Twitter before Elon Musk took it over. And suddenly, when he took it over, wow, the change was just amazingly dramatic. And you realize the amount of sway that has over the national conversation. And I think there's been an awful lot of that. I mean, you see very sort of crazy behavior by some Republicans, like Lindsey Graham or J.D. Vance has described Trump as Hitler, and now he loves him more than anything in the world. And it's very hard to understand why all these people are switching so dramatically, unless there is perhaps compromise on them or something going on behind the scenes.
So I'd like to see how you evaluate the whether there is an evolution between Russian intelligence strategies in purely ideological recruitment or financial and psychological manipulation. To what extent any of the people there that are now serving the Kremlin in whatever capacity are ideologically favorable to the views, to the jaundiced anti-Western ideology, and to what extent they're basically just mercenaries who are seeing an immediate opportunity, who've been somehow manipulated into it.
I think it's far more being mercenaries than ideology. I don't think Trump's ideology is me, me, me. Whatever is good for him. That's his ideology. It's not like he has deep beliefs in what the new Russian system or anything like that. It has nothing to do with that. And I think by and large the Republicans are just fighting for their political uh, ascent.
And do you see Trump and everybody around him as a symptom or an accelerant of a broader vulnerability in the US political culture to foreign influence? Are they causing it, or are they simply reflecting what's already a major issue anyway?
Well, I think it can be both in a way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Trump is certainly an accelerant. I mean, wow, he'll take whatever deal gives him. I mean, and you can easily see Putin buying him off by I don't know, giving him another jet or whatever it is he wants. I mean, but it's that's certainly not ideology. Um, and I think for most of the other Republicans, I think it's largely they're going along with it because it's so important. It's absolutely vital to their political future. But you can see places where they were actually getting money and going way back to the 1990s. When Tom DeLay was, I guess he was House Majority Leader, um, and Russians started funneling money into political action committees that helped him.
How would you describe the convergence of post-Soviet oligarchy with US capitalist elites like Elon Musk and many others? Is there a shared language of power? What brings these two together? Why would American business people have any interest with dealing with the Russians given their history of corruption, mismanagement, and bad endings?
Right. Well, I do think people like Musk are essentially the American version of oligarchs, and Trump has been cultivating his own oligarchs. And if you look in his cabinet, I think there are 11 billionaires. I mean, that's just extraordinary. In the past, you've never had it's been very rare to have extremely rich people in those jobs. It was generally people who had long time experience, whether it was in foreign policy or whatever specialty was essential to them. So I think Trump is trying to turn the United States in essentially into a version of what Putin has done to Russia, which is, I think, effectively a mafia state. And Elon Musk's tenure at Doge was really a good example of that.
Mm. But why do you think Musk cultivated so much of this pro-Russian discourse on his platform? What advantage could he gain from that? After all, he can make money anywhere. What does it? And he doesn't even have such a huge stake in Russia to begin with. Why is he? Why is there so much convergence?
What? Wait, are you talking about Musk or
Yeah, Musk.
I mean, Musk has wanting to be in the government. I think in part because he has huge governmental interest. I mean, his SpaceX program gets billions of dollars
No,
from
no,
the
no, that I
government.
get. My question is, why is his platform seem to be hosting so much of pro-Russian discord? What's in it for him?
Um, why is, I'm sorry, I don't know why Musk is, I don't know what's in it for him, really. I mean, being pro-Russian, I think he was being uh, sort of slavishly aligned with Trump.
Mm-hmm.
More than anything, I mean, that was a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm. What role would you say offshore finance and shell companies are playing in creating shadow states that operate independently of formal institutions and supporting all these operations?
Right. Wait. Can you say that again? I'm sorry. What?
What role do offshore finance and shell companies play in creating shadow states operating independently of formal institutions?
Right. Well, I think all of that is a huge factor. And I mean, it's hard to quantify except to say that there's been trillions of dollars in flight capital. And that is a lot of, ends up being a lot of the money that Trump has in effect laundered. I found there was a study, I think by Reuters, but that 1,500 of Trump branded apartments had been sold under the conditions of what is generally thought to be money laundering. By that I mean anonymously owned properties in all cash transactions. And if you realize that $1 million is a very low ball figure for a Trump apartment, and multiply that times 1,500 apartments, wow, that's $1.5 billion in for Trump to launder, and he makes an awful lot of money over that.
Do you believe that globalization has made the distinction between foreign and domestic corruption obsolete? Does it even make a difference?
It makes it may make it obsolete, or it's certainly been. I've been just astonished at how little enforcement there's been of this kind of thing. That is, I did an awful lot of research and I got a lot of FBI files on Trump. And I also used a lot of public open source documents on real estate that anyone can get on the internet. So I was sort of astounded by how easy it is to figure out how much money laundering has been going on, that it was just extraordinary the amount. And then you have to ask, well, why doesn't the FBI do anything about it? And I tried to answer that a few minutes ago, but
Mhm.
and it may be a partial answer, but I'm sure there's more to it than that.
Um, Talk about the role of the legal and accounting firms in facilitating the laundering not only of money but reputations.
Right. Well, I mean, I think in the first Trump administration, you could see the firm Kirkland and Ellis come in, and William
Mhm.
Barr was in with Kirkland and Ellis, and he ended up being Trump's attorney general. He staffed the Justice Department with an awful lot of his associates. You also had a lawyer for Trump named uh, John McGahn, who was at a firm called Jones Day, and they represented a lot of the huge Russian banks. So you do have a confluence of interests where people are not going to attack those banks that are laundering money and that kind of thing.
So I kind of want to talk about now, bring in something else from your other books, which is the Saudi angle. Do you see any parallels between Russian, Saudi, and American elite networks in terms of secrecy, loyalty, and impunity?
Uh, wow. Well, I guess I haven't really thought of that so much. I mean, Wait, can you, I mean, the similarities between the Saudis and the US in terms
Russians
of
and
secrecy.
Russians and American elites in terms of impunity, secrecy, and loyalty.
Right. Well, I think sadly we have changed and become more and more like the Saudis and the Russians, and that we really don't. It's very rare that we get to the bottom of various scandals. It's
Mm.
also you see officials in the Trump administration are doing a lot of insider trading now. And it's hard to document, but I believe Marjorie Taylor Greene made $22 million or so last year. I mean, she's a congresswoman and her salary is around $200,000. How does she save $22 million out of that? So there's a lot of that going on. Um, and Trump, I mean, is doing things that have never been done before in the crypto world. He's got his coin, meme coins, and so forth. So he's doing a lot that will exploit the presidency for his own personal gain.
So, so that leads me to my next point, which is, you know, are modern intelligence agencies still the most powerful covert actors, or have private intelligence firms and these oligarchic alliances overtaken them?
Uh, they may well have overtaken them. I mean, it wasn't just a failure of the FBI, it was also a failure on the part of the CIA. I talked to a lot of CIA
Mhm.
people who were in Moscow just after the fall of the Soviet Union. And I asked, why were you paying attention to the Russian mafia? And you know, some of the things that were going on, the what the KGB did that was very, very clever. A man named Boris Burstein was behind this. Is he started companies that were, as the Soviet Union was crumbling, he started companies that were essentially KGB fronts, but they were real powerful players in the financial world. They would deal commodities, for example, and the United States, the CIA has uh, companies that are CIA fronts, but they're generally companies like Air America, which everyone knows is an
Mhm.
airline the CIA uses, or you may see an agent if you remember Valerie Plame. Who was a CIA agent, and she had a cover. She was undercover, but it just said she traded commodities, and she didn't. That meant she had business cards and a tiny office, but it really was not a firm that had real operations. The Russians did it differently. And Semyon Kislin, for example, ended up putting together a firm, I think it was called Trans Commodities. It was a real firm. He made hundreds of millions of dollars out of it. And I think it was hard for Americans to realize, oh my God, here you have people who are powerful players in the world of finance, but they're also working for Russian intelligence. And I don't think U.S. intelligence has responded in kind.
Why do you think not? What was the answer about these failings that you got from interviewing these people?
Well, right now, I mean, Trump doesn't want to investigate it. He likes these people. He wants to promote them. He has relationships with them. He's perfectly happy with them. And he has taken over the CIA himself. And in fact, all of intelligence with Tulsi Gabbard and with Ratcliffe at the CIA. Um, so they have switched sides. And essentially that's true in the FBI as well with Kash Patel. They I think are essentially, um, you know, I mean, whether they know their assets or not, they are functioning that way.
But let's face it, even before Trump made this whole situation exponentially worse, a lot of these networks were not really being comprehensively taken down by prior presidents. What is the or by prior intelligence agencies? Why is that the case?
Well, I explained as best I could for the FBI, and I would add there was also another man named James Kallstrom who was head of the New York
Mhm.
office. He was very close to Trump. Trump cultivated him for decades. He said that Trump called him once a week for 40 years. Trump made a big contribution. I think it was $1.3 million in the
Mhm.
70s to Kallstrom's very favorite charity. So they were close, and that meant he turned a blind eye to what was going on with Trump. Uh, it's hard. The CIA question is harder for me to answer. I've explored it, and I don't really know, except the people who were in Moscow while this started off were not looking at the private corporations I was discussing. One of them said, "Oh, we knew about them, but we were told not to go there." And I mean, it really baffles me to this day.
Can a functioning democracy survive the scale of dark money and offshore capital flows that you describe in your books, and especially with the recent legal changes that Trump has instituted, the dismantlement of anti-corruption networks, the cryptocurrency mechanisms, the basically all of these institutionalized anti-money laundering and anti transparency mechanisms that are becoming ingrained in the US political culture. Is this something that will ultimately turn the US into another version of Russia, or can it somehow be countered?
Well, I think I think it's a really good question, and I think it's very hard to counter. And I think right now it's a losing battle. I would not say it's over completely. You see various cracks in Trump's operation. I mean, right now, the MAGA people are freaking out about Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein, they have to get to the bottom of it. Well, I'm telling you, they should be careful what they wish for, because if they get all the documents, Trump is deeply, deeply involved in that, and they're crazy if they don't think so. And I can't give a final answer to your question, but I think there are various fissures in the MAGA world. And I've been thinking they've got to break apart at some time. It hasn't really happened yet. Whether this Epstein fiasco will do it or not, I don't know. And it may come to violence. That would not surprise me either. Or Trump declaring martial law, a general strike. I think this game is not at all over, and I don't know how it'll play out because there's so many variables, and it's very, very dynamic. Everything is always in flux and changing. Um, but to me, I think it's very scary, and that democracy is really endangered in the United States.
This whole Epstein story, the MAGA people have been hyper focused on the allegations of sex trafficking and pedophilia, but far less attention has been focused on the structure of these sex trafficking networks. I don't mean just Epstein and Maxwell and whoever the clients were or may have been, but I'm talking about the functionaries who helped to bring these women into the fold. I'm talking about the financial mechanisms and instruments underlying the structure of Epstein's um, sex trafficking. And I'm talking about his other business ventures that may not have anything to do with sex trafficking per se, but have to do with the fact that he was around a lot of powerful people who confided in him, who had relationships with him, who probably saw him as a useful liaison with assorted informal structures. The fact that he traveled to Russia multiple times, the fact that he went to Saudi Arabia, allegedly had a Middle Eastern, possibly Saudi passport. All of this speaks to the fact that sex trafficking and the blackmail aside, he was well connected with very powerful elite financial networks. And these operations, the money aspect of this whole affair, has not been touched on at all and has not aroused any questioning from the MAGA crowd. So, what do you think about that? Can there be an objective assessment of the networks behind Epstein and what purpose he served besides, the rumors about some of the salacious going on?
Right. Well, there was just a huge number of unanswered questions, and there's no question. Yes, he was absolutely tied to all these powerful people. And if you look at one like his relationship with Leon Black, who is a billionaire head of Apollo Global Management, uh, Leon Black paid him 150, paid $158 million to Jeffrey Epstein. And he basically said it was for financial advice. I mean, for tax advice. I don't know about you, but I have an account and I don't pay her $158 million. And it seemed ridiculous. I mean, explanation of what Epstein was doing because Leon Black had a whole team of tax lawyers. I mean, he could afford, a team of 50 tax lawyers who went to Harvard Law School. Why is he paying $158 million to Jeffrey Epstein? And there are an awful lot of questions like that. And I do think there was a lot of Russian involvement in that. There were women who worked with Epstein. And there's a woman named Masha Drakova, who was head of Nashi, which was essentially the Putin youth group. And she became Epstein's publicist for some reason. I mean, it's very, very weird in a way. There was also a woman named Lana, I guess Svetlana Pozadaeva, who worked closely with Epstein and appeared to be tied in some way to the intelligence world. You had Ehud Barak, who visited of Israel, who visited Epstein many times. What was he doing there? So there are a lot of very interesting questions there. I have not gotten to the bottom of all of that in American Contra. I go about as far as I can in trying to answer them.
So, Apollo Global Management today has been involved in many major deals, especially including in the Middle East and with assorted groups linked to Jared Kushner and his speculative ventures. I believe they may have been the part of the complex arrangement that made billions of dollars in Saudi money disappear into thin air. Nobody has fully tracked where all of that money had gone after Kushner received it. Um, isn't there any question about, forget, all right, sex trafficking, blackmail, intelligence agencies, but things like money laundering, things like embezzlement of funding, things like all these illicit financial operations for self-enrichment by the network of Trumpian cronies involved in all of this. Why aren't there any questions about any of that?
Well, I have loads of questions about it, but the Justice Department has been taken over by Trump, so he's not going to investigate anything that might lead to him or his allies. I mean, I think it's as simple as that. And I think under Biden, Merrick Garland was very weak and dropped the ball and was just slow. I don't think there was so much corruption there as just plain old being weak and slow.
Mm-hmm. Well, hmm. So in so I kind of want to get back to this conflation of different international interests. In House of Bush and House of Saud, you argue for a deep entanglement of US and Saudi interests. Has this logic now expanded to include Russia, especially as we, by the way, also see the Saudis and Russians becoming more publicly connected than they've ever been?
Wait, has what expanded
This
has
logic of extremely incestuous relationships and business interests.
Well, I think it has with Trump. I mean, I don't think it's with America as a whole, and if it was not the
Hmm.
case during the Biden administration. But I think Trump sees the world in a very, very transactional way. So
Hmm.
if he can turn Gaza into a resort, a Mediterranean resort, that's what he wants to do. And I think similarly with Ukraine war, he just wants uh, some sort of transactional end to it. I'm not sure that answered your question.
Well, we are seeing that Trump has prioritized deals with particular countries, but those countries are now growing closer to Russia themselves. How does that work? We're seeing that Saudi Arabia, which publicly at least has always been pro-American, is increasing its level of public business dealings with Russia. We're seeing, we're seeing frequent high-level visits between foreign ministers. We are seeing, and we're talking about business interests, not just in energy, as was always the case since OPEC, since the 1990s, but also rare earth minerals and metals and things like that. So, how does that work with Trump in the midst of all of this? Given that on the one hand, Russia is supposed to be an anti-American state looking to recapture US allies, but on the other hand, all of that basically comes down to corruption and big money interest from private actors.
Right. I mean, with Trump, I believe it's almost entirely corruption or at least transactional kind of relationships. He doesn't ideologically want to be aligned with Russia or against it. He doesn't care. But
Hmm.
what I think is really most striking about Trump is that he's been willing to throw away the entire Atlantic Alliance. To me, the Atlantic Alliance was the most powerful foreign policy initiative in history. I mean, if you look back to the end of World War II, it created a strong democratic institution in more than 2 dozen countries in Europe. It created strong market economies, and there were military allies through NATO. I mean, it was from an American point of view. The relationship with Europe was a spectacular success. And Trump has turned against it. And as I said, he turned against it immediately after his first trip to Moscow in 1987. And I think the Soviet Union and now the Russian Federation would love nothing more than to destroy NATO. And Trump has been really a big part, has made the U.S. an unreliable ally in NATO. And if the United States is unreliable, wow, NATO isn't what it used to be.
Do you think Trump is an anomaly, or is he merely exposing the extent to which US politics are already compromised?
Well, it might be both. I mean, I think he's an anomaly in that he's an extremely weird guy. He, I mean, he is essentially a reality TV host. I mean, that's what he did, and that's what he does. And when you see him on TV, he's sort of a master of distraction. I mean,
Mhm.
some of the times I think he's just rambling, but it was really extraordinary during the November election cycle as we were running up to election. Suddenly, he spent 4 days uh, getting the media to talk about nothing other than the size of Arnold Palmer's penis, and um, the golfer, and whatever the case, that's not a real issue that is important in American life, and somehow or other, that became the focus of attention rather than the really very serious political issues we were confronting.
So, a lot of there's a lot of course speculation about different things, but one thing that we are seeing is family ties, religious movements, financial institutions all come into play. And to what extent would you say they intersect to forge US foreign policy outside of democratic oversight?
Well, I think that's a huge part of what Trump does, and it's what the Republicans have been doing for years. In my book, Den of Spies, I talk about the 1980 presidential election between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan. And the key issue in that election was Iran had seized 52 American hostages. If Jimmy Carter got them back before the election, he would likely win because he'd be considered a great hero. If not, he'd be considered a failure for allowing Iran to humiliate America. And what the Republicans did, the Republican campaign chairman, William Casey, who is a brilliant, brilliant spy. I mean, I think he's one of the greatest spies in American history. But while he was running a presidential campaign, he was secretly meeting with the mullahs of Iran. He would fly off to Madrid and have secret meetings there where he made a deal with them. Don't return the hostages. Continue to incarcerate them right up until after the election. That way, Ronald Reagan will win. And that's exactly what happened.
And of course, that followed by the Iran-Contra scandal.
Right. In many ways, it was the birth of the Iran-Contra. That was selling arms to Iran, and it continued on up through the 80s when Reagan became president.
What about family ties? Do you see that this whole, structure of families being entering politics becoming kind of renormalized? I mean, we've had some of that for a while. We've had the Kennedys, the Bushes, the Clintons, but is Trump taking this whole idea of nepotism to a whole new level?
Uh, yeah, he wants to keep it in his family as much as he can. And Don Jr. has a future. I don't know what Ivanka's been doing lately. I've been following her much. But you also, Jared Kushner has been a very, very important player with Trump. And you can see they will all profit from uh, his presidency. And Eric, I believe, is and Don Jr. are handling the uh, crypto world, the bitcoins and so forth.
Is it at the end of the day all about loyalty? Is Trump such a big family man, or is it just because he can only trust these family members?
I can't, again, I don't like to pretend I can get inside Donald Trump's head, but
Mhm.
I think he sees his family as an extension of him, and he'd like to keep his family in important roles, whether they're in the administration or running his Bitcoin operation.
Can congressional oversight mechanisms still serve as meaningful checks to foreign influenced corruption?
Wait, you're asking, do they or
Can they?
they could. They've been weakened enormously, and I think you could see that dramatically during the January 6th commission, which I think was doing a very, very good job of getting to the bottom of what happened between Trump when he was uh, uh, trying to get information that would get from Ukraine that would could be used against Hunter
Mhm.
Biden and Joe Biden. So they did a good job, and people like um, uh, uh, Congressman Raskin and so forth. I think Liz Cheney did. I think they did a very good job, but in the end, it wasn't successful because they didn't. Trump was indicted and was actually convicted of a lot of crimes, but he was never sentenced, and the whole process took so long that before he could be sentenced, he was elected president again, and that rendered the whole process moot. So I think I don't think the era of congressional oversight is necessarily over completely, but it needs to be strengthened enormously.
Who would do that given that Trump is in power and would unlikely to sign any law that Congress would pass?
Well, that's up to Congress, really, and Congress has been pathetic recently. I mean, they can't do anything. I mean, the Republicans are sort of marching in lockstep with him, and they will oppose any real measures to have real serious oversight. So that is the problem, I think it's not going to really happen until the Republican coalition starts to crack. And whether that's over something like the Jeffrey Epstein files or what, I think there are issues that split will split the coalition, but it has not happened yet.
The problem that we're looking at more about individual actors being compromised or are entire systems being captured?
Well, both, I think, and I mean, we saw it begin with individual actors. As I mentioned, back in the 90s, you'd see Tom DeLay would get a huge contribution that indirectly came from Russia. Um, Trump was compromised starting in the 80s. Um, and enough powerful people within the Republican Party have taken that road that basically the whole entire party is captive now. Um,
What about
and
industries?
um, Well, you see the industries capitulating to Trump because they kind of have to go along with them if they're to survive financially. So CBS's capitulation, CBS paid $16 million to Trump. And it was very much, it was a ridiculous lawsuit. They had edited an interview with Kamala Harris, and Trump sued them over it, saying they made her look good. Well, every TV interview is edited, and you may edit this this interview unless you want to have all my boring pauses in it. And that's as it should be. The things should be edited. It makes it easier for the reader or the audience to consume the news. There was no reason for CBS to pay them off except they've got a merger that's in the near future, and they want Trump to let it go through, and they're afraid that he wouldn't do that. So Trump is holding huge corporations hostage, and often enough they pay him off. A lot of big law companies did the same. Law firms did that recently as well. I think the Washington Post has ineffectively done that as well. You've seen these huge corporations capitulate, and it makes it very hard for individual reporters like me to, keep standing up to Trump.
Do you think journalists today can still expose transnational corruption effectively, or are they at this point mere targets in information warfare?
Well, I think they've been weakened enormously, and we've had, it's interesting the the First Amendment, which is about freedom of the press, it only talks about the press, print. It doesn't talk about broadcast. It certainly doesn't talk about the internet or cable TV, and it certainly doesn't talk about social media. And the press has been weakened just in extraordinary ways since I started out. And you had stories like the Pentagon Papers or the My Lai massacre that were explosive when they landed. The entire country was paying attention, and it changed the course of events. And we remember them 50 years later. Today, you have corruption on just an epic scale that far exceeds what Nixon did in Watergate. And people yawn. And I find that very distressing. I mean, I think a part of it is the way our media has been atomized. That is, when I got out of college, Americans everywhere live by the same set of facts. And I think this is really a product of hybrid warfare, but that's no longer the case. I mean,
Mhm.
people really believe Hillary Clinton engaged in pedophilia in the basement of this pizza place, which doesn't even have a basement if you go there. I mean, so there are all these stories made up that have completely are completely divorced from factual reality. And a lot of people just don't know what to believe. And that makes it very, very difficult. We do not share the same set of facts.
So would you say that in addition to that, Americans are just too desensitized or cynical to be shocked by evidence of compromise or corruption?
Well, I think it's partly they're desensitized, you say, or inured to it, or it's just that they're numb. I think it's partly that everything exists in silos now, and we're in your little media silos on social media. Everyone has a different set of friends and they talk to each other, and there's an echo chamber, and one silo can be very, very different from the next and they can be adjacent and not even know about each other.
So if everything is now seen as partisan spin, how can the public ever recognize when something is truly dangerous and is unfolding behind the scenes?
Um, Wait, say that again, please. I'm sorry.
If everything is seen as partisan spin, how can the public ever recognize when something is truly dangerous and is unfolding behind the scenes?
Well, people have to look at the source of the information. And I don't think people do that, and I think it's very, very difficult. I'm a journalist, so I had my own ideas. Excuse me. I know the bylines. I know my colleagues. I know who's
Mhm.
good among them and who's not. And if someone I really respect writes a story, I may read it. And if it's explosive, I'll understand why. But I think the general population has a real problem with that. And we've seen, I mean, and this goes back to the Epstein case, and Pizzagate was being propagated by QAnon, who are purveyors. It's a cult. They're purveyors of conspiracy theories that have no basis whatsoever in reality. And a lot of people don't know whether that information is coming from a cult like QAnon or a good journalist with a rigorous background who works for a place like, I don't know, the New Yorker or the Atlantic or whatever.
So where do we go from here, and what's next for you in that sense?
I wish I knew. I mean, I think things are really at a point where it's near the breaking point, but it hasn't quite broken. I kind of hope Trump's uh, supporters will split apart, and I think that is possible, but it's not certain, and I have no idea what will be a timeline. But I think it has to happen if we're to remain a democracy. We can't just go on like this, and if Trump is not challenged, we will lose our democracy.
What about yourself? How do you see following up on everything you've already researched and written?
Well, I started writing for Substack recently, and I'm going to see
Mhm.
how that goes. Right now, I'm not in a position to try another book. I may do that in the future, but when I write a book, I try to look 2 or 3 years in the future and think, well, when the book comes out, it will grant be a receptive audience because this is where we'll be. Right now, I don't have a clue where we're going to be in 2 or 3 years. And I'm just going to keep writing on Substack until I have a better idea of that. I think the Democrats have to fight back. They will, but it's still a long time before the midterms, and a lot can happen between now and then. And
But
it's a nightmare.
But let's face it, the Democrats themselves have not been blameless, and that's been part of Trump's appeal. It's not that, anybody's perfect, but there's been a fair share of corruption and political weakness and sordid deals among Democrats elites as well. So how do we recapture a spirit not only of bipartisanship, but of calling out bad actors on whichever end of the political aisle they are, instead of just political parties protecting their own, no matter what the actual, ideology or loyalty lies, just because of labels.
Right. The Democrats need new, stronger leadership, and I think their basic problem has been weakness more than anything else. I'm sure there's certainly some bad actors, but not compared to the Republican Party. And I mean, and the Democrats deal with it quite differently. If Senator Menendez, for example, was a Democrat who was indicted and I believe convicted, um, uh, and I think as a result lost his seat. But I mean, we don't. Democrats don't hang on to people in the way the Republicans have. The Republicans uh, allow all this. Corruption and it doesn't faze them in the least, or maybe they don't hear about it. I don't know because they don't. As I say, we all live in different silos, and it's very, very hard to reach them. In all these books I write, uh, I try to write them in a non-rhetorical way that's based on fact and reason, uh, hoping to convert a Republican. But you know what? After years and years of doing this, I'm not sure any Republicans ever read them.
Hmm. Do you think if you came up with a similar, series that took a look at the bipartisan foreign infiltration, the Republicans would be more willing to look at it objectively if they saw that it wasn't just their party that's being scrutinized?
Well, I don't have any evidence that the Democrats have been infiltrated by the Russians, or if there are, I'd certainly report it. But I don't know who among them has done that. There were efforts, and the members of the Russian mafia in the 90s
Hmm.
went to Clinton campaign rallies and in some cases made small contributions, $5,000 or so to Clinton. And you could see there were efforts, but so far as I could tell, they didn't really get beyond that.
Hmm. That said, there have been other, allegations specifically by China and by Iran, of undue influence at the very least within the Democratic parties. And if not the Russians, then those other foreign influence campaigns. And of course, Qatar has been a bipartisan problem, by and large. Um, I think I truly do believe that if somebody tries to compile an objective report on these efforts and foreign influence in various institutions and in various parties, people will be forced to confront the reality that foreign influences don't just target one party; they target everybody, and by enabling corruption and enabling blind partisanship, we are all only contributing to the problem.
Well, maybe you know more than I do, but has the Russians penetrated the Democratic Party in ways that I don't know?
In the past, they have. There hasn't been, a president who has been captured by the Russians, who has been so openly pro-Russian. Obama has admittedly made mistakes with Russia, but his proclivities and sympathies lay elsewhere. He has been attacked for being excessively sympathetic to other sorts of actors, not specifically to Russia, beyond his initial first term effort to make friends with Putin. There was that hot mic moment about how he said that in his second term he would be more flexible than in his first term in his discussion with Putin. That certainly has happened, and that's something that the Republicans have certainly used to shield themselves against attacks on Trump. Um, um, I would say that many of Trump's current associates, political appointees, some of them are former Democrats. Tulsi Gabbard, for instance, was a formerly a Democrat who has been very much touting, on the one hand, Russian and other foreign talking points, but on the other hand, also pushing sort of somewhat progressive policies that many across the aisle people sympathized with, and that's why she had some Democratic following to begin with before she started supporting Trump. So the scale of specifically Russian influence currently may be much less involved with the Russians, but it doesn't say mean there hasn't been efforts by the Russians to penetrate the Democrats, or there haven't been successful efforts by other foreign influence campaigns to make allies in the Democratic Party. And China is a prime example of that, for instance.
Right. Um, I'm not sure what I have to add to that really. But you know, as you say, Tulsi was a Democrat, but she is no longer.
Mhm.
And I kind of, it seemed to me the Russian influence seemed to coincide with her leaving the Democratic Party. Um, but you know, for example, on the Democratic side, I believe it's 100% in turn who are support Ukraine over Russia, and it's the Republicans who have turned against Ukraine. Certainly, Trump.
Well, that remains, of course, the key issue of the day, and let's hope some people start waking up and seeing that corruption ultimately ends up dragging everyone down with them, and nothing good ultimately ends up happening to these people. For now, Trump may be granting endless pardons to corrupt people, including, by the way, the Democratic politician from Illinois, Blagojevich, who has been instrumental in Trump's real estate projects. There, he has been admittedly convicted for corruption, but now Trump was the one who brought him out. So this whole thing of partisanship is starting to break down when Trump himself is deliberately making allies out of any corrupt fraudster that there has been or is from any party. And that's deeply concerning. That's deeply concerning, and I hope this is the point where everyone needs to wake up, realize that simply firing partisan shots at each other is not going to help put an end. That all it does is create rhetorical excuses to avoid accountability and kind of focus on putting an end to criminality in whatever form it comes.
Right, right. I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure what I have to add to that, but
But thank you so much for helping expose a lot of these background informations, these developments, and um, these operations, really, I would say, that have contributed to bringing us to where we are right now. I think it's important to understand the history, including the history of the past few decades that have shaped, and staged the current events, I would say.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. Do you mind if I ask you, are you Russian or
I'm from Ukraine originally.
Ukraine? Okay.
Yeah, I'm from Ukraine. I'm a national security lawyer, in the US, and I'm also myself involved in investigations on some of these networks. So your work is tremendously helpful in that regard.
Wonderful. But so you're a lawyer in the U.S. working on national security issues involving, are they involving Ukraine or and
They essentially involve U.S. Foreign malign influence operations from various actors, not just Russia, but of course intersecting with Russia a great deal.
who are your clients? Who you end up working for? Or
Well, I have my own independent think tank, which actually is involved in these investigations. As for my skills, at times I assist private corporations looking into basically targeted campaigns, but also other issues, not just that. That's just part of my profile. At times there are NGOs that are engaged, in similar types of work and are looking for additional research or additional ways to expose it, and really anybody who has an interest in this sort of work.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you
Uh,
so much.
okay. Well, I appreciate it, and I hope I gave you what you want.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone watching this. We'll be back next Tuesday night at 9 p.m. As usual. And thanks for everyone who joined us this evening. Have a great night.